back on. I'll start to admit them. Let's give them another minute or so before we get started.
I think Daniel Bush is going to be on everything.
Ấy, có việc. Đó, đưa tôi chỉ báo lại kho vậy. Tôi để thấy đồ chứ. Tôi để thấy đồ tới sau này mình.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to ask you to just mute yourselves. I'm going to do that too. We're going to get started in about a minute or so, but just to make sure that you guys are in the right place, welcome to Rutgers Business School's Supply Chain Management presentation. So tonight we'll have one of our professors who will be sharing a presentation with you. We're going to have one of our current students in RBS kind of talk about their experience. So this is a great opportunity for you guys to ask plenty of questions, learn more about supply chain management, talk to our student to learn more about their RBS and RU experience. The nice thing is that you guys will be joining us this fall back on campus, which is great for you guys. So you can put your questions in the chat box. We'll be monitoring the chat box so that we can make sure the professor answers them. Or once he's done with this presentation, you guys will be able to unmute yourself, share your cameras, and be able to ask questions that way, whichever you prefer. So I'm Christine Yanuzzi. In case you guys haven't seen me, I've been popping in and out of all of these Zoom sessions. I recognize some of you from just being on the bait call with me. And maybe some of you will join me at 7 for the accounting call and proceed throughout the week with some great content. We are recording the session. So by tomorrow, we will have this session, the recorded session, up on the Rutgers Business School's webpage. But without further ado, I am going to introduce Professor Mcclury. He is, again, one of the professors in the supply chain department. So I'm going to have him take it away, and I'll keep my eye on the chat box if you have questions as he goes through his presentation.
So Christine, am I able to share my screen?
You are.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. So hello, I'm Professor Mcclury, as Christine said. I'm an associate professor here at Rutgers Business School in the Department of Supply Chain Management. Now, prior to Rutgers, I was executive director of pharma supply chain with Novartis Pharmaceuticals for a little bit more than 30 years before I retired in 2014 and joined the Rutgers Business School faculty full-time. So today I'd like to spend just a few minutes showing you why we think you should consider majoring in supply chain management at Rutgers. I'm also going to be joined by one of our senior supply chain students, Kylie Williams, who will help me answer some of your questions at the end. So first, I want to spend a few minutes just making sure that everybody understands what a supply chain is, and then show you why you might want to consider majoring in supply chain management here at Rutgers. And we do this because, unfortunately, not everybody really fully understands what supply chain management is, and maybe you're one of those people. And so we want to make sure we're kind of all on the same page before we talk about the major itself. So, as you can see described here, any organization anywhere in the world offering a product or a service has a supply chain. And that's because products and services are created from all kinds of resources, such as materials, equipment, labor, time, money, and so on. And producing and delivering these products and services to the market requires suppliers to deliver all the resources to manufacturers, who then convert these resources into products and services that are purchased by customers. Now, all the suppliers, manufacturers, and customers for a specific product or service make up the supply chain. Now, these supply chains can be very simple, such as the one for a product like a paperclip. You obtain some wire, bend it into a paperclip shape using some labor and equipment, and then put a number of them into a box or a bag to sell to consumers like you and me. Now, if the process is automated, you might be able to make hundreds of paperclips per minute. Supply chains can also be very complex, such as the one for a commercial airplane. There are likely hundreds of suppliers of thousands of parts, which have to be assembled in stages over many months just to complete one commercial airplane for a customer. Now, supply chains exist in organizations that are very large, like Ford Motor Company, General Electric, or Johnson & Johnson, but they also exist in organizations that are very small, like your local mom and pop shop on the corner selling sandwiches and coffee. These small organizations have a supply chain through which they source their ingredients and their materials, manufacture their products and services, and then distribute them to their customers, just like the large organizations do. Supply chains also exist in both publicly traded companies as well as those companies that are privately held, and they exist in for-profit commercial businesses, as well as not-for-profit organizations like the Red Cross or even the US government, for example. Now, on this slide, I'm going to show you how a supply chain is structured. So I want you to think of yourself as the manufacturer of a product. It doesn't matter what, any kind of a product. A supply chain consists of the flow of materials and products from your external suppliers of raw materials, intermediate materials, or finished materials or services to you as a manufacturer of finished products. You convert or transform these purchased materials into your finished products using your own internal operations and/or outsourcing some manufacturing to an external third-party company if you choose to. You then distribute your products to your customers through one or more distribution channels. Now, as a manufacturer, you may sell your products through wholesalers and distributors, who in turn sell the product to retailers, who then sell the product to the ultimate consumer like you and me. Manufacturers may alternatively sell direct to retailers or consumers, or through any combination of these various different distribution channels. A manufacturer may even sell some of their products through one distribution channel while selling others through a different distribution channel, depending on the type of product being offered. Now, each of these suppliers, manufacturers, and customers are individual links in the supply chain. And that entire process is facilitated by what we refer to as logistics, which includes managing all of the inventory that flows through the supply chain, any warehousing needed to temporarily store that inventory, and of course, all the modes of transportation that we use to move that inventory from the point of origin to the destination, such as by truck, rail, air, water, and even pipeline. So now that we know what a supply chain is, we can talk a little bit about supply chain management, which is the coordination of the network of these otherwise independent trading partners, meaning all the suppliers, manufacturers, and customers. They're all separate legal entities who are creating a desired product or service and then moving it through the supply chain out to customers when and where the customer wants it. So what does that mean? It means that supply chain management is all about creating a process to help all these separate companies work together so that they can function like they're one big company to satisfy the market for the products and services that they collectively provide. Now, even though these suppliers, manufacturers, and customers of a product may all be separate companies, it's actually in their best interest to work together. We like to say that supply chain management is the way business gets done. So now that we know a little bit about why you might want to, what a supply chain is, we might want to talk a little bit about why you should consider pursuing a degree in supply chain management at Rutgers. Today, there is a significant shortage of supply chain talent. In the world in general, but particularly here in the US, we're creating a significant number of new supply chain jobs every year. Even though student enrollment in supply chain programs has been steadily increasing, academic institutions offering supply chain training and education, such as Rutgers, are still not able to keep up with this extraordinary demand, graduating far fewer supply chain majors each year than are needed by businesses. And as you can see from the examples shown here on the bottom of the slide, there are an abundance of job opportunities available across every link in the supply chain, So if you think you're a people person and you like to interact with people, you might want to work on the supplier side or the customer side in, say, purchasing or customer service, where you're interacting with people in other companies. If you're more of an introverted person, you like dealing with numbers and plans and schedules, then you might want to work on the manufacturer side, where you're doing planning and scheduling, international trade management, risk management. Or if you like to be involved in all aspects, you could be involved in logistics, which involves warehousing, transportation, distribution, inventory management, and interacts with suppliers, manufacturers, and customers across the whole supply chain. So this significant and growing talent shortage that I mentioned can be attributed to a number of factors, including the continued and accelerated pace of globalization. Pretty much every company today can buy and sell their products on the international market using the internet. You can have suppliers all over the world and customers all over the world. So the world's become a much smaller place because companies can interact with people all over the world. It also involves the rapid expansion of e-commerce. We're all buying a lot more things online, particularly now post-pandemic. So if we're dealing with all of these e-commerce orders, we're expecting that we're going to get rapid delivery. So the changing consumer expectations are a big driver in the supply chain. We all expect that we're going to order something online and get it delivered the next day. Well, that doesn't happen by accident. There's a lot of planning and logistics that goes into that. A lot of supply chain expertise is required. There are also a lot of new and increased risks to the supply chain. If you're going to buy and sell your products globally, if you're going to do things over the internet, that just increases the risk to your company. And there's a widespread adoption of lots of new technologies and innovations that I'll talk about in just a moment. And if you couple all those factors with the fact that middle and senior level supply chain leaders like me are retiring from the workforce in record numbers, it's really not surprising that potential employers are having trouble finding enough supply chain talent to fill all their available positions. So what's the bottom line? What does it all mean? It means there's an abundance of job opportunities in supply chain management. It's probably the number one reason that most students major in supply chain, is because they're almost guaranteed that they're going to get a pretty good job when they get out of school. Now, I mentioned new technologies and innovations. No longer is supply chain management considered just a support function of manufacturing. The value of supply chain management has been recognized by business leaders and grown in importance in most organizations. Lots of organizations have a chief supply chain officer or a chief procurement officer that's at the same level as their chief operating officer, their chief financial officer. In fact, some of the most advanced technologies and biggest innovations driving business today are happening right in the supply chain. So here on this slide, there's a sampling of some of the most widespread and well-known technologies and innovations being used in the supply chain today. Things like artificial intelligence, blockchain, 3D printing, drone deliveries, self-driving trucks, robotics, and e-commerce, just to name a few. So if you're interested in pursuing a degree in supply chain management, you'll need a total of 120 credits. In addition to the School of Arts and Sciences core courses and the pre-business courses, which you see in box number 1 and box number 2, students will need to complete the business core courses shown in box number 3, one of which is Introduction to Supply Chain Management. Completing an undergraduate degree in supply chain management requires a total of 24 credits within the major, as shown in box number 4. That's 5 required courses for 15 credits that cover all the basic supply chain fundamental disciplines. And then you can choose any of the various elective courses, 3 of those for 9 credits, which offer students opportunities to pursue their chosen area of interest within supply chain. So if you're interested more in purchasing, or you're interested more in distribution or transportation, there are courses that will align with your interests. Now, a key differentiator of the Rutgers supply chain program from those programs at other schools is the experiential course requirement. And what that means is that students must complete either a supply chain internship, a co-op, or an industry client project, which enhances their academic classroom work with real world experience in supply chain. And that's something that potential employers really value. So it's not just going to school and learning out of a book. We require you to do some work in supply chain, and you can put that on your resume, and employers are looking for that when they go to hire students. In order to help you obtain those full-time jobs or to get those internships or co-ops to fulfill your experiential course requirement, the supply chain department organizes an exclusive supply chain career expo each fall and spring, where companies meet and interview supply chain majors to fill their talent acquisition needs. So this is an exclusive event for supply chain majors. So the companies that come there are specifically hiring for supply chain jobs. We held our most recent event a few weeks ago, and even though it had to be held online, from all the feedback we received, it was very successful. For those who do graduate from Rutgers Business School with a bachelor's degree in supply chain management, 92% are placed within 3 months of graduation. That means you have a full-time job in a supply chain function within 3 months of graduation. And actually 75% of the students are placed at or before graduation. The average starting salary for a Rutgers supply chain undergraduate is $60,000 a year. And the average salary for an experienced, meaning if you have 3 to 5 years, supply chain management with a bachelor's degree is over $78,000 a year, which is 24% higher than the national average for all occupations that have a bachelor's degree. So what's the bottom line? Well, we hope that you consider a primary or a secondary major in supply chain management. So now we're going to take questions that you may have, and joining me to answer your questions is Kylie Williams. She's a senior supply chain management student, president of RUSCA, which is the Rutgers University Supply Chain Association, and she's the recipient of the 2021 Departmental Outstanding Achievement Award, which is bestowed upon the graduating senior who has high academic success and also provide exceptional service to the supply chain department. So I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Kylie, can you maybe talk a little bit about your experience, if you've had any internships or what you've done while being an RBS student?
Yeah, of course. So I actually transferred to Rutgers my sophomore year, and I went right into supply chain. My first internship was the summer of 2019. I worked with Walmart e-commerce in one of their fulfillment centers. I ended up living in Pennsylvania for the summer, which was pretty cool. Walmart's a really awesome company to work with. Their supply chain is probably one of the best out of like most companies. And even just getting to work in a warehouse and seeing all of that happen in front of you, it's a very almost like surreal experience if you're into supply chain, because every warehouse almost has like their own little mini supply chain that goes into like the bigger supply chain of the whole company. And then my junior year, so this past summer of 2020, I worked with Mondelez International, which is the company that makes Oreos, Chips Ahoy, like Cadbury products, Triscuits, all the snacking foods basically. And I worked in it was called a CS&L role. So it was a little bit of logistics, which is like one segment of supply chain, along with like a customer service role. And it was really awesome. I actually got both of my internships through Rutgers, one through my club sophomore year, and then the second one through the Supply Chain Expo my junior year. And it's been fantastic. All of the professors are very responsive. They're very, very knowledgeable. I think most, if not all of the professors in the supply chain department have worked like at least like 20, 30 plus years in the industry before either becoming an adjunct or becoming like a full-time professor like Professor Mcclury. And it's honestly just been a great experience. I know I have friends in all of the majors in the business school, and everyone is always a little jealous of supply chain because our professors are so great. Our classes are honestly very, very interesting. And yeah, it's been a really awesome experience, like joining the club. I also TA for a few classes, so it's been fun seeing kind of like the behind the scenes of the department and everything. But overall, I think supply chain is a fantastic major for whoever wants to go into it. It's very flexible. There's a plethora of jobs that you can go into, and literally every company and every business has a supply chain and needs some form of a supply chain manager. So even just like the job flexibility post grad, I think is what's always attracted me the most to the program.
Wonderful. And Professor, we did get a question that came in. Do you know if any of our graduates have found work in the entertainment industry?
I don't know of any specifically, but there certainly are supply chain jobs in the entertainment industry. I mean, if you think about everything that, whether it's a television or movie production or something on Broadway or a musical, any of those types of things are going to require, the companies or organizations to purchase things, move things around. So there's certainly going to be supply chain jobs, but I don't know of a particular student per se that's in that industry.
Okay, great. Guys, do you have any questions? If you maybe want to unmute yourself, throw something in the chat box, get a student perspective, a professor's perspective, this would be the time to do that.
I have a question.
Sure, Antonio, go ahead.
I was wondering what really drove you to supply chain management over any other major?
Is that for Kylie?
Yes, sir.
So a funny story about that, actually. So I have two older brothers. My middle brother actually studied supply chain at Rutgers before I did. And I was thinking about transferring. I changed my major probably about 3 times my first semester freshman year. So if you want to change your major, don't worry about that. Everything always works out in the end. But he was telling me about one of his internships at like this big chemical company. And it just seemed really interesting, like supply chain. There, like Professor Mcclury said, there really is a little bit of something for everyone. If you're really like data analytics driven, there's like things for you. If you love customer service and if you like to talk to people, there's things for you. And I really think overall the flexibility is kind of what drove me to it, because I can go get a job. I'm moving to New York next summer to work with Mondelez. I could get a job in California if I want to. I could go work overseas if I want to. It's an incredibly flexible career field to go into. And I think that's definitely what's attracted me the most to it.
Thank you for your answer.
Professor, here's a question for you. Do any of the students in supply chain double major or minor in another area? And maybe what would you recommend?
Yes, they do. About 25% of the students actually have a double major, whether it's a primary supply chain or a secondary supply chain. The most common, I think, is with finance. There's a lot of overlap in supply chain with finance, but you can double major in any of the other majors with supply chain. We have students that are double majoring in supply chain and marketing or supply chain and accounting. I personally think that the best one is supply chain and BAIT, which is business analytics. And the reason for that is because everything now in the supply chain is dealing with big data and how to understand, interpret, collect and synthesize all this big data, all this customer data, supplier data, and companies are using it with things like artificial intelligence and machine learning to make their operations so much more efficient. And so if you have a background in some computer sciences and business analytics like with BAIT, to couple that with supply chain, I think you can pretty much write your ticket as to where you want to go. You're going to be in high demand for many, many years to come. So if I was going to do it, that's what I would double major in. It's not easy because, it's a lot of courses that you have to take, but it's certainly going to be worth it in the end. You're going to give yourself a way to differentiate, your resume from everybody else's if you have that double major. There are also a few concentrations, like you could do a supply chain major with a finance concentration. I think there are 3 classes that you have to take in finance, and you can have a supply chain major with a finance concentration. It's like a minor, but in New Brunswick, we call it a concentration.
Right. Great question. Anybody else have something that they maybe want to ask Kylie or the professor or put in the chat box?
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, sure. First of all, great presentation, both of you. Definitely learned a lot. So I have a little background in NASCAR. I'm a big NASCAR fan, big motorsports fan, racing, all that cool stuff. And this one kind of goes to both of you. I don't know if this is the case, but do you know of anybody who's been in supply chain in the motorsports area, like NASCAR, Formula One, all that, et cetera? And if so, how did that go for them?
I know that there was a student that was pursuing that a few years ago. I honestly don't know if he ended up, in that NASCAR sport area or not, but there's certainly, just like the question with the entertainment industry, there's certainly a lot of opportunity, in NASCAR. If you think about, all of the parts and things that you have to be able to, operate a NASCAR, as well as, all the logistics involved in moving things around from one race to the next. So there's certainly going to be a lot of logistics activities, purchasing activities, in that field. But I don't know specifically if there's a student in that area. Kylie, do you know if there's any student?
Well, I don't know any students who've worked like specifically with NASCAR. I know I personally worked at, I have a family friend who runs like a Napa Auto Parts, if you know, just like an auto parts store basically. So I actually worked there for like part of a summer when I was like waiting for one of my internships to start. And it's honestly, I think it's very relevant. Like even like if you want to break it down, like when it comes to inventory management, like working with suppliers, just again, like dealing with other people. So I think if you want to find that, you can like find that niche in supply chain if you want. Like there's like, I've said this multiple times already, like there's so many like opportunities and there's so many like ways to find like what you want to do with supply chain and really make the major your own, which I think is like, I feel like supply chain is one of the, like, not the few majors, like obviously RBS has fantastic majors. I'm a little bit more biased. But you really can like take supply chain and take your education and like find that niche and find what you want to do. You could probably do a little networking. Like I'm sure if you come to the business school, you're going to make a LinkedIn. Honestly, people love talking to students. So if you go on LinkedIn and find people who work for motorsports or NASCAR, I'm sorry, those are the only two that I know for NASCAR, for like cars and stuff. But you could find people say, hey, I'm a Rutgers Business School student studying supply chain. Like I would love to get to your position. Like, how would I go about that type of thing? If that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I don't know if I mentioned it, but Rutgers Business School has the second ranked supply chain major in North America, and we've had that for quite a while now. So it's a highly respected program in North America, which also means it's highly respected in the rest of the world as well. But we have a very robust program, and our students are very highly sought after. There are some companies like Intel and Dell that heavily recruit, at Rutgers specifically because of the reputation of the supply chain program.
Professor, we got a question that came in on the topic of bait. What would you say, if you know, is the most prominent codes used within supply chain? Things like R, SQL, Python.
I mean, I'm not a computer science person, but I have heard students talking about Python. Maybe Kylie knows, but Tableau is something that I know that it's a relational database program that even our own procurement department at Rutgers uses. And so there are a number of different software tools out there. Kylie, do you have any insights?
Yeah, I definitely think in terms of code, SQL is probably one of the biggest ones. As Professor Mcclury mentioned, Tableau is another big one. I've worked for some companies that have like their own proprietary technology, so they use like some different codes. But I definitely think, I mean, this might not be as like technical as like a whole bait major is, but even just like a basic understanding of Excel will really take you a very long way in supply chain.
Great. We also got another question for the professor. Would you double major in supply chain management and computer science? Is that something that students do?
I think that's harder to do because computer science is not in RBS. I think you'd have to be an RBS student and major in supply chain, and then do either a major or minor in computer sciences outside of RBS. So I'm not sure how easy that actually is to do. And that might even be more difficult to do than the double major with supply chain and bait. So that certainly would be valuable, but that's a lot to bite off and chew.
Yeah, to follow up, the comp sci is very credit intensive. You can do a double major, but RBS needs to be your primary school if you want to do any of our 6 majors, and then you can do a double major outside, and you would satisfy that course and their credits within the major as well as the RBS credit requirements. So something to keep in mind. But if you're somebody coming in with maybe AP courses, that might be a little bit easier to kind of fit into your schedule, if that helps. Just check if we have anything else. Anybody else want to unmute and ask a question?
I will say, as Kylie mentioned, almost every employer that's recruiting students, not just for supply chain, but for pretty much anything in the business school, they require an extensive knowledge of Microsoft Excel. Even though you might have a a fancy ERP program like SAP or something from Oracle or Microsoft, Microsoft Excel is still a tool that most companies use, even if it's just as a support program to do a lot of things before they decide to enter it into their big ERP system. So we do offer a certification program in Microsoft Excel. The more you know about Microsoft Excel, the more you're going to set yourself apart and differentiate yourself when you go to look for a job. So I highly encourage you to learn as much about Microsoft Excel as you can.
Anyone else have questions maybe for Kylie, for a student perspective, even about Rutgers in general, what it's like to be a student, how she managed her time with working, internships and coming to school. Takes a lot of very strong time management skills. So maybe somebody wants to ask, or Kylie, if you could talk a little bit about that. I just have to run to my next session. So I'm going to leave Kylie to moderate, but maybe if you could dive into that and answer a few of those questions, that might be good.
Yeah, of course. So before I get into that, I saw someone ask a question if there's any co-op opportunities. Yes, there are so many co-op opportunities. I know Bristol Myers has a few. J&J has, they come to Rutgers specifically to recruit. So as I mentioned before, I'm the president of one of the supply chain orgs on campus. I think of my e-board, 3 of us have had